The warning lights flashed red across the control panel as Marcus Chen fought to keep his small research ship steady. Sparks flew from broken circuits while the engine made terrible grinding sounds. Through the cracked window, he could see the blue and purple planet growing bigger and bigger as his ship fell toward it like a stone. "Come on, come on," Marcus whispered to himself, pulling hard on the controls. He was just a scientist, not a pilot. He studied old ruins and dead civilizations, not spaceships, but right now, he needed to land this thing without dying. The ship hit the atmosphere with a loud roar. Fire covered the windows as they fell faster and faster toward the ground. Marcus held tight to his seat and tried not to think about what would happen if he crashed too hard. He had been on his way to study some ancient ruins on this planet when space pirates attacked his escort ships. His captain told him to run while the military ships fought back. Now he was alone on a world he knew nothing about. The ground rushed up to meet him. Marcus saw tall purple trees and crystal formations that looked like mountains. There was no good place to land. He aimed for what looked like an open field and hoped for the best. The ship hit the ground hard. Marcus felt his teeth slam together as everything around him shook and bounced. Metal screamed against rock as the ship slid across the purple grass for what felt like forever. Finally, everything went quiet except for the hissing sound of broken pipes and the crackle of small fires. Marcus sat still for a moment, checking if he was hurt. His head pounded and his shoulder ached, but nothing seemed broken. Smoke filled the cabin, so he knew he had to get out fast. He grabbed his tool bag and the emergency kit, then kicked open the door that was bent and stuck. The air outside was clean and fresh, but it smelled different from Earth air. It had a sweet smell, like flowers mixed with something sharp like metal. 2 suns hung in the purple sky, one bright yellow and one pale blue. The grass under his feet was soft and purple, and it seemed to glow a little in the double sunlight. Marcus looked around at the alien world. In the distance, he could see the crystal mountains reaching up toward the sky. Strange bird-like creatures with 4 wings flew overhead, making musical sounds. It would have been beautiful if he wasn't so worried about being stuck here with no way to call for help. He had just started to check his emergency radio when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of metal hitting metal in a steady rhythm, like soldiers marching. And it was getting closer. Marcus looked toward the sound and saw them coming over a small hill. They were tall and moved like dancers, but they carried weapons that gleamed in the sunlight. Even from far away, he could tell they were not human. They were too tall, too graceful, and they seemed to shine with their own light. There were 6 of them, all wearing armor that looked like it was made from the same crystal as the mountains. They carried long swords that curved like moons and moved in perfect formation. As they got closer, Marcus could see they were female, with long silver hair that moved in the wind and skin that had a faint blue glow. The leader was taller than the others and carried a sword that seemed to be made of pure light. Her armor was more complex, with symbols carved into it that seemed to move and change as Marcus watched. Her eyes were large and silver, and when she looked at him, Marcus felt like she could see right into his soul. The group stopped about 20 feet away from Marcus. The leader said something in a language that sounded like music, mixed with the ringing of metal. Her voice was beautiful, but cold. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. They wanted to know who he was and what he was doing here. Marcus slowly raised his hands to show he wasn't carrying any weapons. "I'm sorry," he said in a calm voice. "My ship crashed. I didn't mean to land on your world. I'm not here to cause trouble." The leader's silver eyes studied him carefully. She said something else to her soldiers, and they spread out in a circle around Marcus. Their movements were so smooth and quick that Marcus barely saw them move. One second they were standing together, and the next second he was surrounded. Marcus knew he was in serious trouble. These were clearly warriors, and from the way they moved and held their weapons, they were very good at fighting. He was just a scientist with some digging tools and a first aid kit. If they wanted to kill him, there wasn't much he could do to stop them. The leader stepped closer and spoke again. This time, Marcus heard something different in her voice. She sounded curious, like she was asking a question. She pointed at his ship, then at him, then made a gesture he didn't understand. Marcus tried to think of a way to communicate. He pointed at himself and said, "Marcus," slowly. Then he pointed at his crashed ship and made a motion like something falling from the sky. He hoped she would understand that he had crashed and wasn't here on purpose. The leader watched his gestures carefully. She seemed to be thinking about something. She spoke to one of her soldiers, who stepped forward and started scanning Marcus with a device that looked like a crystal wand. The device hummed and glowed as it moved over him. After a few minutes, the soldier stepped back and reported something to the leader. The leader's expression changed. She looked surprised, then confused, then angry. She barked orders to her soldiers, and they all drew their weapons at the same time. The crystal swords hummed with energy as they pointed at Marcus. He could feel the heat coming off them even from several feet away. The leader raised her own sword high above her head, and Marcus realized she was about to strike him down where he stood. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about his parents back on Earth, about the ruins he would never get to study, about all the things he would never do. He was scared, but he also felt strangely calm. There was nothing he could do now except face whatever was coming with dignity. The leader's sword stayed frozen in the air above Marcus's head. He could hear the energy humming through the crystal blade. He could feel the heat on his face. But the killing blow didn't come. He opened his eyes slowly and saw her staring at him with those strange silver eyes. She was studying his face with intense focus, like she was seeing something that confused her. Marcus remained perfectly still. He didn't beg for his life or try to run. He just stood there, breathing calmly, waiting for whatever would happen next. The warrior woman lowered her sword slightly. She spoke to her soldiers in their musical language, and they seemed surprised by whatever she said. One of them, a woman with shorter hair and scars on her armor, stepped forward and argued with the leader. Her voice was sharp and angry, but the leader shook her head firmly. She pointed at Marcus and said something that made all the soldiers step back. Whatever she had said, it was clearly an order they had to follow, even if they didn't like it. The leader walked closer to Marcus until she was only a few feet away. This close, he could see that her skin didn't just glow blue. It had tiny patterns like stars that moved slowly across her face and arms. Her armor was covered in symbols that seemed to be alive, shifting and changing as he watched. She spoke to him directly now, and even though Marcus couldn't understand her words, he could hear something different in her voice. It wasn't angry anymore. It sounded more like she was asking a serious question. Marcus tried to think of a way to answer. He touched his chest and said, "Human," slowly. Then he pointed up at the sky and made a gesture like traveling. He hoped she would understand that he came from far away and was different from whatever other aliens she might know. The woman tilted her head to one side, studying him. She said something that sounded like a question. When Marcus just looked confused, she seemed to make a decision. She stepped even closer and placed one hand on his chest, right over his heart. Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation where her hand touched him. It was like a mild electric shock, but not painful. More like the feeling when your foot falls asleep, but pleasant instead of uncomfortable. The woman's silver eyes went wide, and she pulled her hand back quickly. She spoke rapidly to her soldiers, pointing at Marcus. They all looked shocked. The scarred woman argued again, her voice getting louder and more upset. But the leader cut her off with a sharp command. The leader looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised him completely. She set her sword down on the purple grass and knelt in front of him. Her soldiers gasped and stepped forward, but she held up a hand to stop them. She spoke again, and this time her voice was soft and respectful, totally different from before. Marcus didn't understand what was happening, but he could tell something important had changed. The woman stood up again and moved very close to Marcus. She was almost a foot taller than him, so she had to look down to meet his eyes. She said something that sounded like a formal announcement, speaking not just to Marcus, but to her soldiers as well. Then she reached up and gently touched Marcus's face with both hands. Her touch was warm and sent that tingling feeling through his whole body. She looked into his eyes for a moment, then leaned down and pressed her lips to his. Marcus was so shocked he almost pulled away. But the moment their lips touched, something extraordinary happened. It felt like his mind exploded with light and images and feelings that weren't his own. He saw flashes of the woman's memories. Her name was Lirelei, and she was a captain in something called the Zephyrian Empire. He saw images of vast starships and battles among the stars. He saw worlds being conquered and strange alien beings surrendering to warriors like her. But he also felt her emotions, and that's what surprised him most. He felt her sadness and her fear. She wasn't a cruel conqueror who enjoyed hurting others. She was a soldier, following orders, fighting for her people's survival. Through the connection, he felt her surprise at what she was seeing in his mind. She was experiencing his memories too. His life as a scientist on Earth, his fascination with dead civilizations, his sadness when he studied the ruins of cultures that had been destroyed by war or disaster. She saw his genuine curiosity about other species, his hope that different races could understand each other and work together. She felt his loneliness as someone who spent most of his time studying the past instead of living in the present. Most importantly, she felt something she had never experienced before in any other being. When Marcus faced death, he wasn't angry or bitter. He wasn't plotting revenge or thinking about what he could take with him. Instead, he felt grateful for the life he had lived and curious about what came next. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours to both of them. When Lirelei pulled away, her silver eyes were filled with wonder and confusion. She spoke to Marcus, but now he could somehow understand her words, like the mental connection had taught him her language. "You are different," she said. "Your mind is not like the others we have conquered." Marcus could still feel the echo of her thoughts in his head. "Your people are afraid," he said softly. "You're not conquering worlds because you're cruel. You're doing it because you're running from something terrible." Lirelei's eyes went wide. She stepped back and looked at her soldiers, who were all staring at Marcus like he had just performed magic. She spoke to them quickly in their own language, then turned back to Marcus. "The kiss of recognition," she said slowly. "It is written in our oldest laws. When a warrior faces death without fear, without anger, without hatred, when they show only peace in their heart, they are marked as heart-bound." Marcus didn't understand what that meant, but he could tell it was important from the way the soldiers were looking at him now. They had gone from wanting to kill him to staring at him with something that looked like respect, or maybe fear. "We thought the heart-bound were just legends," Lirelei continued, "stories from the old times. But you truly have no darkness in your soul. Even facing death, you held no malice toward us." The scarred soldier stepped forward and spoke angrily to Lirelei. Marcus could understand some of her words now. She was saying that legends weren't real, that Marcus was just another weak alien who should be eliminated according to their laws. But Lirelei shook her head firmly. "The recognition kiss has been given," she said. "By the ancient laws of our people, he is under my protection now. We will take him to the council, and they will decide what this means." She picked up her sword and gestured for Marcus to walk with her. As they started moving toward the Crystal Mountains, she spoke quietly to him. "I do not know what you are, Marcus of the humans," she said. "But the kiss showed me your heart, and it is unlike anything I have ever seen. Perhaps that is why the old prophecies speak of the heartbound returning when our people need them most." Marcus walked beside her, still feeling confused and overwhelmed by everything that had happened. But as they moved toward whatever awaited them, he couldn't shake the feeling that this strange encounter was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them realized. The Zephyrian city was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was built into the side of a massive crystal mountain, with buildings that seemed to grow out of the rock itself. Bridges made of light connected different levels, and the whole city glowed softly in the light of the two suns. As they walked through the streets, Marcus noticed that all the Zephyrians they passed stopped to stare at him. Word had spread quickly about the human who had received the kiss of recognition. Some looked curious, others suspicious, and a few seemed almost hopeful. Lirelei led him to the largest building at the top of the city. It was a hall made entirely of crystal that reached high into the sky. The walls were covered with carvings that told the story of the Zephyrian people, their rise to power, their great battles, their expansion across the stars. Inside the hall, 12 Zephyrians sat in a circle on chairs carved from single pieces of crystal. These were clearly the leaders, the council that Lirelei had mentioned. They were all older than her, with silver hair that had gone almost white, and skin that glowed brighter than the younger Zephyrians. At the center of the circle sat a woman who was clearly their leader. She was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries and scars that spoke of countless battles. When she looked at Marcus, he felt like she could see every thought he had ever had. Lirelei stepped forward and spoke to the council in formal language. Marcus could understand most of what she said now, thanks to the mental connection they had shared. She told them about finding him, about his strange reaction to facing death, and about what the kiss of recognition had revealed. The council erupted in angry voices. Several of them stood up and pointed at Marcus while they argued. The scarred soldier from Lirelei's patrol was also there, and she added her own complaints about breaking tradition and putting their people at risk by trusting an alien. But the ancient leader held up her hand, and everyone fell silent immediately. She stood up slowly and walked over to Marcus. Like Lirelei had done, she placed her hand on his chest and closed her eyes. Marcus felt that tingling sensation again, but stronger this time. The old woman's mind was much more powerful than Lirelei's, and she dug deeper into his memories and thoughts. He felt her surprise as she saw his life on Earth, his work as a scientist, his genuine love for learning about other cultures. When she pulled her hand away, her expression was troubled. She spoke to the council, and Marcus heard her confirm what Lirelei had said. He was indeed heartbound. Someone with no darkness in his soul, someone who faced even death with peace instead of hatred. The prophecies spoke of this, the old leader said, turning to address Marcus directly. They said that when our people's greatest trial came, the heartbound would return to guide us toward a new path. She gestured for Marcus to sit in a chair they brought for him. I am Elder Celestine, speaker for this council, and I believe it is time you learned the truth about our people. Marcus, of the humans. What Marcus learned in the next hour changed everything he thought he knew about the Zephyrians. They weren't cruel conquerors who enjoyed destroying other civilizations. They were refugees, fleeing from a disaster that threatened to destroy their entire species. Their homeworld, Zephyros, was dying. A cosmic plague had infected their planet 500 years ago. Something they called the Void Blight. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard of. Not a disease that killed people directly, but something that drained the life force from everything it touched. It started small, Elder Celestine explained, her voice heavy with old pain. A dark spot in our most sacred forest. The trees there began to wither and die, but not in any normal way. They turned gray and crumbled to dust, as if the very essence of life was being pulled out of them. The plague spread slowly but steadily. Every year, more of their world became dead and gray. Every year, fewer children were born to their people. Every year, more Zephyrians weakened and died as the Void Blight consumed the life force of their planet. We tried everything, another council member said. Our greatest scientists, our most powerful warriors, our wisest mystics. Nothing could stop it. We could only watch as our beautiful world turned into a dead wasteland. That's when they made the terrible decision to leave. But they needed new worlds to live on, and no one wanted to share their planets with a species of powerful warriors, so they took what they needed by force, telling themselves it was necessary for their survival. We became what we never wanted to be, Lirelei said quietly. Conquerors. We told ourselves we had no choice, that it was either take from others or watch our people die. Marcus listened to their story with growing sadness and understanding. These weren't evil beings bent on destruction. They were a desperate people, trying to save their species in the only way they knew how. But as Elder Celestine continued talking, Marcus began to remember something from his work. The description of the Void Blight sounded familiar. He had read about something similar in the ruins he studied, references to an ancient catastrophe that had destroyed several civilizations millions of years ago. Wait, Marcus said, interrupting the elder's story. This plague you describe, The way it drains life force and turns everything gray. I think I've seen references to it before. The council looked at him with sudden interest. Marcus tried to organize his thoughts. In my work, I study dead civilizations, ruins of species that lived long ago. On several different worlds, I've found records that mention something called the Grey Death, or the Life Eater. He stood up and began pacing, the way he always did when he was thinking hard about a problem. Most people thought these were just myths, stories that primitive civilizations made up to explain natural disasters. But what if they weren't myths? What if this plague has appeared before in the galaxy's history? Elder Celestine leaned forward with intense interest. You believe other species have faced the Void Blight? I think so, Marcus said. And more importantly, I think some of them might have found a way to fight it. On one world, I found ruins that showed a civilization surviving something that matched your description exactly. They didn't just run away. They actually cured their planet. The hall erupted in excited voices. The possibility that the plague could be stopped rather than just escaped was something none of them had ever considered. But Marcus held up his hand to calm them down. The problem is, I was on my way to study those ruins when my ship crashed here. All my research data was on my ship, and I don't know how much of it survived the crash. Lirelei stepped forward. Your ship, we can recover what remains of it. Our engineers are skilled at repairing damaged technology, but Marcus was already thinking beyond that. Even if we can recover my data, there's something else. From what I could tell before the crash, the civilization that beat the plague didn't do it alone. They worked together with other species, combined their knowledge and abilities. He looked around the room at the council members. The Zephyrians are incredible warriors with advanced technology and psychic abilities, but the species that defeated the plague before, they were builders and scientists and diplomats. They were good at bringing different groups together and making them work as a team. Elder Celestine's eyes widened as she understood what Marcus was suggesting. You believe the cure requires cooperation between different species? I think that might be exactly what it requires, Marcus said. And if I'm right, then conquering other worlds isn't just morally wrong. It's making the problem impossible to solve. You can't get the cooperation you need from people you've enslaved. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Everything the Zephyrians had been doing for centuries might not only be wrong, it might be preventing them from finding the very solution they desperately needed. Lirelei spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. Then we need to change everything. We need to stop being conquerors and start being. What? Partners? Marcus nodded. That's exactly what you need to become, and that's what humans are good at, bringing different groups together, finding common ground, building trust between species that have been enemies. Elder Celestine stood up slowly, her ancient face showing a mix of hope and fear. The prophecies spoke of the heartbound guiding us to a new path. Perhaps this is what they meant. Perhaps the path to saving our people isn't through conquest, but through the cooperation you speak of. She looked around at the other council members. We must consider this carefully. If there is even a chance that this human speaks the truth, we cannot ignore it. The survival of our species may depend on learning to do something we have never done before. Trust our former enemies and ask for their help, instead of taking what we want by force. The next few days changed everything for both Marcus and the Zephyrians. Teams of their best engineers worked around the clock to recover data from his crashed ship. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself in the strange position of trying to teach an entire warrior civilization how to make friends instead of conquering enemies. It wasn't easy. The Zephyrians had been soldiers for so long that they had almost forgotten how to be anything else. When Marcus suggested they should offer help to other species instead of demanding surrender, many of them looked at him like he had lost his mind. You want us to give our technology to the people we have conquered? Asked Commander Thane, one of the more traditional members of the War Council. They will use it against us the moment we show weakness. Marcus shook his head patiently. He had been having conversations like this for 3 days straight. That's not how cooperation works. You don't give everything away at once. You start small, with something that benefits both sides. He stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over the Crystal City. Below, he could see Zephyrian ships landing and taking off, carrying soldiers and supplies to various conquered worlds. Soon, if his plan worked, those same ships would be carrying doctors and teachers instead of weapons. Think about it this way, Marcus continued. Right now, the species you've conquered hate and fear you. They follow your orders because they have no choice, but they're always looking for ways to rebel or escape. Is that really the kind of help you want when you're trying to cure a cosmic plague? Lirelei nodded thoughtfully. She had been his strongest supporter on the council, helping him explain human concepts that the other Zephyrians found difficult to understand. He's right. We've spent so much energy keeping our subjects under control that we've never actually benefited from their knowledge or abilities. Elder Celestine had been quiet during most of these discussions, but now she spoke up. What exactly are you proposing, Marcus? How do we change 500 years of conquest into cooperation? Marcus had been thinking about this problem since his first day here. We start with the species that have the least reason to hate you, the ones you conquered most recently, before you had time to hurt them too badly. We offer them a deal. Oh, he turned to face the council directly. You withdraw your occupation forces and give them back their freedom. In exchange, they agree to work with you on solving the plague problem. They keep their independence, but they also get access to Zephyrian medical technology and protection from other threats. Commander Thane laughed bitterly. And what happens when they refuse? What happens when they tell us to leave and never come back? I do necked. Then you respect their choice and move on to the next species, Marcus said simply. The whole point is that it has to be voluntary. Forced cooperation isn't real cooperation. This concept was so foreign to the Zephyrians that several council members started arguing at once. They had never considered the possibility of offering someone something without demanding something larger in return. But Marcus wasn't finished. Here's the thing you need to understand about humans and species like us. We're naturally curious about other cultures. When someone approaches us with respect and genuine friendship, we usually respond the same way. Most species in the galaxy probably feel the same. Over the next week, Marcus worked with Lirelei and a team of Zephyrian engineers to recover his research data. What they found was even better than he had hoped. Not only had most of his files survived the crash, but the Zephyrian technology was able to enhance and clarify information that had been too damaged for him to read before. The ancient civilization that had defeated the plague was called the Harmony Collective. They weren't a single species, but an alliance of 12 different races that had come together when the Void Blight threatened their entire region of the galaxy. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to a section of recovered text that the Zephyrian computers had translated. They didn't just work together by accident. They deliberately sought out species with different abilities and perspectives. The cure they developed required knowledge from all 12 races. The text described something called a bioharmonization field, a kind of energy pattern that could restore life force to areas affected by the Void Blight. But creating the field required specific contributions from multiple species, like different instruments in an orchestra playing together to create a symphony. The aquatic minds provided the mathematical foundation, Marcus read aloud. The crystal singers contributed harmonic frequencies. The plant shepherds offered biological understanding. The energy dancers supplied power regulation. He looked up at the council. No single species could do it alone. Lirelei studied the data carefully. This explains why our attempts to fight the plague have failed. We've been trying to solve it as Zephyrians, using only our own knowledge and abilities, but according to this, we need partners with completely different ways of thinking. Elder Celestine was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. If this is true, then our entire approach has been backwards. Instead of conquering other species, we should have been learning from them. But Marcus could see that many of the council members were still skeptical. Commander Thane, in particular, kept shaking his head. This is all very interesting as history. He said. But how do we know we can trust these other species? How do we know they won't betray us once they learn about our weaknesses? Marcus had been expecting this question. You don't know, he said honestly. That's what trust means. Believing in someone even when you can't be completely certain. But here's what I've learned from studying history. Species that build civilizations based on cooperation tend to be trustworthy. They have to be, or their civilizations fall apart. To demonstrate what he meant, Marcus proposed a small test. There was a species called the Verdani that the Zephyrians had conquered only 6 months ago. They were plant-based beings who specialized in biological sciences, exactly the kind of knowledge that might be useful against the Void Blight. Let me go to their world with a small team, Marcus suggested. Not as conquerors, but as visitors asking for help. We'll explain the situation honestly and see how they respond. The council debated this idea for hours. Half of them thought it was too dangerous, that Marcus would be captured or killed by angry Verdani who wanted revenge. The other half thought it was worth trying, especially after seeing the evidence that cooperation had worked before. Finally, Elder Celestine made the decision. We will try this human approach, but Marcus will not go alone. Captain Lirelay will accompany him, along with a small honor guard. If this fails, we will know that the old ways were correct. 3 days later, Marcus found himself on a Zephyrian ship heading toward the Verdani homeworld. Lirelay sat beside him, nervous but determined. She had spent the journey studying everything they knew about Verdani culture, trying to understand how to approach them as potential partners instead of conquered subjects. What if they refuse to even listen to us? She asked as they approached the green and blue planet below. What if they attack us the moment we land? Marcus smiled reassuringly. Then we'll apologize for bothering them and leave peacefully. The whole point is to show them that we respect their choices. As their ship entered the atmosphere, they could see the damage that 6 months of Zephyrian occupation had caused. Several Verdani cities showed signs of battle, and the orbital defense platforms hung, broken, and lifeless in space. But Marcus also noticed something else. The planet was still green and alive. The Verdani had surrendered quickly, before the Zephyrians could cause too much destruction. That was a good sign. It meant there might still be trust to rebuild. They landed in a clearing outside the largest Verdani city. As they stepped off the ship, they were immediately surrounded by tall, tree-like beings with bark-covered skin and leaves instead of hair. The Verdani looked suspicious and afraid, but they didn't attack. Marcus stepped forward slowly, his hands open and empty. He spoke in the trade language that most galactic species understood. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a human scientist, and I've come to ask for your help with something that threatens all life in the galaxy. The largest Verdani, who seemed to be their leader, made a sound like wind blowing through branches. When he spoke, his voice was deep and slow, like the creaking of old wood. Human? We know of no species called human. And why should we help any ally of the Zephyrians? Marcus had prepared for this question. Because, he said simply, the Zephyrians are dying. And if we can't find a cure for what's killing them, it might spread to every living world in the galaxy, including yours. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the research station orbiting Zephyros and watched something that had never happened before in galactic history. Ships from 15 different species worked together in perfect coordination. Their crews focused on a single goal that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. They were healing a dying world. The bioharmonization field generators hung in space like a constellation of hope. Each one had been built by a different species, contributing their unique knowledge and abilities to create something no single race could have accomplished alone. The Verdani had provided the biological frameworks. The Zephyrians had contributed the energy systems. The crystalline singers had supplied harmonic frequencies, and a dozen other species had added their own essential pieces to the puzzle. Marcus felt a familiar presence beside him and turned to see Lirelay approaching. She looked different now than she had during their first meeting. She still wore armor and carried weapons, but her role had changed completely. Instead of being a conqueror, she had become a protector and a bridge between cultures. The field generators are ready, she reported. But her voice carried more than just a military update. There was excitement there, and hope and something else Marcus had learned to recognize as the distinctly Zephyrian emotion that meant the end of a long journey. Elder Celestine is asking if you want to be the one to activate the system. Marcus shook his head with a smile. This isn't just about me, or even just about humans. Tell her that representatives from all 15 species should activate it together. That's the whole point of what we've built here. Through the viewing port, they could see the surface of Zephyros far below. Most of the planet was still gray and lifeless, consumed by centuries of the void blight. But in some areas, where they had been testing smaller versions of the bioharmonization field, green shoots of new life were already beginning to appear. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding time of Marcus's life. Convincing 15 different species to work together had required every skill he had learned as a scientist, diplomat, and student of cultures. Each species had their own fears, their own reasons for distrusting others, their own ways of thinking about problems. The Verdani had been surprisingly willing to help once they understood the true scope of the threat. As a plant-based species, they understood better than most how important it was to preserve life in all its forms. But convincing them to trust the Zephyrians had taken weeks of careful negotiation. The breakthrough had come when Marcus suggested something radical. Joint research teams where members of different species worked side by side. Instead of each group working separately and sharing results, they would combine their knowledge directly, learning from each other in real time. The first mixed team had been an experiment that almost failed. Zephyrians thought in terms of energy and combat tactics, while Verdani thought in terms of growth and biological systems. Their approaches were so different that they could barely communicate at first. But Marcus had learned something important about humans during this process. They were natural translators. Not just of languages, but of ideas and perspectives. When a Zephyrian scientist talked about energy flow patterns, and a Verdani researcher mentioned life force circulation, Marcus could see that they were describing the same thing from different angles. You're both right, he had told them during one particularly frustrating research session. Energy and life force are connected. The Zephyrian approach gives us the power we need, and the Verdani approach gives us the biological understanding to use that power correctly. Slowly, one species at a time, the alliance had grown. The crystalline singers joined when they realized their harmonic abilities could help tune the bioharmonization fields. The aquatic minds contributed their mathematical models for predicting how the fields would interact with different types of matter. The energy dancers helped design the power regulation systems that would keep the generators from overloading. Each new species that joined brought not just their knowledge, but their unique way of looking at the problem. And Marcus found himself in the role he never expected. Not just a scientist or a diplomat, but a bridge between different ways of thinking. The hardest part hadn't been the technical challenges, though those had been enormous. The hardest part had been helping the Zephyrians learn to see their former enemies as potential friends. 500 years of military thinking didn't change overnight, but Lirale had become his greatest ally in this effort. Her experience with the kiss of recognition had changed her deeply, and she used her influence among the Zephyrian military to promote the new approach. She had started training programs where Zephyrian soldiers learned to be protectors and peacekeepers instead of conquerors. The field is ready for activation, came the announcement over the station's communication system. Marcus and Lirale made their way to the command center, where representatives from all 15 species were gathered around a circular control console. Elder Celestine stood at the center of the group, but she was no longer the sole leader. The Alliance had created a new form of government where decisions were made by consensus, with each species having an equal voice. It was messy and complicated, but Marcus had learned that the best solutions usually were. 600 years ago, Elder Celestine said, addressing the mixed group of aliens around her, the void blight began consuming our world. We thought the only way to save our people was to take from others by force. Today, we learn whether a different path was possible all along. Each representative placed their hand, claw, tentacle, or equivalent appendage on the control console. Marcus was honored to be included, representing humanity's contribution to the Alliance. When everyone was ready, they activated the bioharmonization field together. Light exploded from the generators in space, but not the harsh light of weapons or destruction. This was the soft, warm light of life itself, flowing down toward the planet in waves of healing energy. On the viewing screens, they could watch the effects in real time. Where the light touched the gray, dead areas of Zephyros, color began to return. Plants that had been withered for centuries suddenly burst into bloom. Rivers that had dried up began to flow again. The very air itself seemed to sparkle with renewed vitality. But more importantly, Marcus could see the faces of the beings around him. Zephyrians were crying tears of joy as they watched their homeworld come back to life. Verdani were swaying in harmony with the energy flows they could sense through their plant-based nervous systems. The crystalline singers were humming in perfect tune with the bioharmonization fields. "It's working," whispered Lirelai, and Marcus heard wonder in her voice. "It's actually working." The process took 3 days to complete. When it was finished, Zephyros was green and blue and alive again, more beautiful than it had ever been before the plague. But the real change wasn't on the planet's surface. It was in the relationships between the species that had worked together to heal it. A month later, Marcus found himself in a completely new role. He had been chosen as the first human ambassador to the Galactic Cooperation Council, the new organization that had grown out of their alliance. His job was to help other species join the council and to mediate disputes between different cultures. It wasn't always easy. Just last week, he had spent 3 days helping the silicon-based architects understand why the gas cloud wanderers found their construction methods offensive. But Marcus discovered that he loved this work. Every day brought new challenges, new perspectives, and new opportunities to build understanding between different ways of life. The Zephyrians had become the military arm of the Cooperation Council, but their role was completely different from before. Instead of conquering worlds, they protected them from real threats. Instead of enforcing submission, they helped maintain peace between species that might otherwise fight each other. Lirelai had been promoted to admiral, in charge of training the new Zephyrian peacekeeping force, but she spent most of her time on diplomatic missions, using her warrior skills to protect negotiators and researchers instead of conquerors. Their personal relationship had also evolved into something neither of them had expected. The mental connection they had shared during the kiss of recognition had never completely faded, and over time it had grown into something deeper than either friendship or romance. They were partners in the truest sense, each one's strengths balancing the other's weaknesses. "Do you ever think about that day when we first met?" Lirelai asked one evening as they stood together on the observation deck of their diplomatic ship. They were traveling to a new world where 2 species were having territorial disputes, and the council had asked them to mediate. Marcus smiled, remembering the moment when he had closed his eyes and prepared to die, only to receive the most unexpected kiss in galactic history. "I think about it all the time. If you had just killed me that day like you planned, none of this would have happened. But you didn't fight," Lirelai said thoughtfully. "You didn't run or beg or try to bargain. You just accepted what was coming with peace in your heart. That's what made me realize you were different." Marcus nodded. "I think that's what humans do best. We adapt to new situations instead of trying to force them to be what we want. When I crashed on your world, I could have been angry about it or afraid of you. Instead, I got curious about who you were and why you were doing what you were doing." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars stream by outside the ship. Each of those points of light represented a world with its own species, its own culture, its own way of understanding the universe. And for the first time in galactic history, many of those worlds were learning to work together instead of fighting each other. The Council received 3 new applications for membership this week, Lirelai mentioned. "The hive minds from the Andromeda sector want to join, and so do the machine intelligences from the core systems." Marcus grinned. "Machine intelligences? That should be interesting. I wonder what unique perspective they'll bring to our alliance." As their ship approached the disputed world, Marcus felt the familiar excitement that came with a new challenge. Somewhere down on that planet, 2 species were convinced they couldn't coexist peacefully. His job was to help them discover what humans had always known: that the galaxy was big enough for everyone, and that cooperation was always better than conflict. He thought back to that moment 6 months ago, when he had closed his eyes and prepared for death, only to find life and hope and love instead. It had been the most important kiss in galactic history. Not because of what it was, but because of what it led to. A new way of living together among the stars. And it had all started because a human scientist had faced the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, and because an alien warrior had been wise enough to recognize that sometimes the greatest strength comes from choosing not to fight,